Let me begin by saying that in sharing this story, I've chosen to use names that are not the real ones involved. They're placed there randomly to make it easier for you to follow along while protecting the privacy of those who lived through this ordeal. The events themselves, however, are drawn from actual reports within the church and from that infamous television broadcast. As a priest who's been appointed by the Vatican as an exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis since 2005, I've encountered many cases of demonic possession in my ministry. But this one stands out because it unfolded so publicly, right on national television, reminding us all that evil doesn't hide in the shadows forever. It sometimes steps into the light to challenge our faith. It was a spring evening in April of 1991 down in Tampa, Florida, a city known for its sunny beaches, its vibrant Hispanic Catholic community, and those long stretches of white sand along the Gulf Coast. But on this night, the focus wasn't on the warmth of the sun or the rhythm of the waves. Instead, it was on a studio broadcast from ABC News, specifically the program called 2020, hosted by the renowned journalist Barbara Walters. Now, Barbara was no stranger to tough stories. She'd interviewed world leaders, celebrities, and everyday folks facing extraordinary circumstances. But what happened that night went beyond anything she'd prepared for. The segment was meant to educate the public about the reality of demonic possession, something the church has dealt with for centuries, but rarely discusses openly. They had set up a live feed from a hospital room in Tampa, where a young girl, let's call her Gina Ramirez, just 16 years old, was undergoing an exorcism rite led by Father James Lampert, a seasoned priest from New York, about 50 at the time, officially recognized by the Vatican as an expert in these matters. Picture this. Gina, who had once been a typical high school student at Tampa Catholic High School, with long black hair, a love for drawing pictures of landscapes and animals, and a quiet, obedient nature that made her parents proud. She came from a devout Catholic family, her mother, Maria, a homemaker in her early 40s, always with a rosary in hand. Her father, Juan, a fisherman around 45, working the bays to provide for them, and her older brother, Carlos, 18, who looked out for her like any protective sibling would. They lived in a modest home on Bayshore Boulevard, overlooking the water, a place that should have been filled with peace, but something dark had taken hold of Gina. On that broadcast, she was strapped to a chair in the hospital room, not out of cruelty, but to protect her and those around her from the violent outbursts that had become all too common. As the cameras rolled, Barbara Walters introduced the segment from the New York studio, her voice steady, but with that underlying curiosity that made her famous. She explained how Father Lampert, with his background in handling possessions since his days in Chicago, had been called in after doctors ruled out mental illness. Gina had been exhibiting signs that baffled everyone, speaking in ancient languages she couldn't possibly know, displaying unnatural strength, and recounting events from history with chilling accuracy. The rite began simply enough, Father Lampert, dressed in his clerical collar and stole, holding a crucifix and sprinkling holy water, reciting prayers from the Roman ritual. In the name of Jesus Christ, he intoned, "I command you to reveal yourself." That's when things escalated. Gina's eyes rolled back, her body convulsed, and she let out a guttural growl that didn't sound human. It was like the wind howling through a storm, deep and resonant, carrying an otherworldly echo. She thrashed against the restraints, her voice shifting into what sounded like ancient tongues, languages later identified by experts as Aramaic and Sumerian, tongues from the cradle of civilization that a teenage girl from Florida had no business knowing. The studio crew in New York froze. You could almost feel the tension through the screen. Barbara tried to maintain composure, asking Father Lampert questions about the process, but Gina, or whatever was inside her, interrupted. In a voice that rasped like sand over stone, it addressed Barbara directly. "Barbara, I know your secrets, the child you lost, the pain you hide behind your smile." It was a personal revelation, something from Barbara's private life that no one in that room, let alone a stranger from Tampa, could have known. Barbara's face went pale. The broadcast nearly cut to commercial, but they kept rolling, capturing the raw horror. This wasn't just theatrics for ratings. Father Lampert had initially approached the case with caution, as we exorcists always do. We collaborate with psychiatrists and doctors to ensure it's not schizophrenia or some other psychological issue. In Gina's case, medical tests came back normal, no tumors, no chemical imbalances. But the manifestations were undeniable. During preliminary sessions, Gina had levitated slightly off her bed, her body hovering inches above the mattress, defying gravity in a way that science couldn't explain. And then there were the physical changes. Her skin would grow cold to the touch, like ice, even in Florida's humid heat, and she'd vomit substances that looked like desert sand, gritty and dry, as if pulled from some ancient wasteland. As the broadcast continued, the entity inside Gina named itself Pazuzu. Now I pause here because this name carries weight in the annals of demonology. From my studies and experiences, Pazuzu is no ordinary demon. In ancient Assyrian mythology, he was depicted as a winged creature with a scorpion's tail, a dog's head, and eagle's talons. A king of the winds, specifically the southwest wind, that brought drought, famine, and plague to the lands of Mesopotamia thousands of years ago. The ancients feared him as a bringer of disease, manipulating weather to spread sickness and death. But in biblical terms, we understand these entities as fallen angels, cast out for their rebellion against God, seeking to corrupt humanity out of envy for our divine favor. Pazuzu wasn't just a myth, it was a real spiritual force, one that had tormented souls across centuries. How did this ancient evil find its way to a modern American teenager? That's where the mystery begins to unfold, piece by piece. It turns out Gina's family home on Bayshore Boulevard had a dark history. Years earlier, in the 1980s, it belonged to a man we'll call Victor Hale, a ruthless drug dealer operating in Florida's underworld. Victor wasn't content with earthly power. He dabbled in the occult, seeking forbidden knowledge to gain an edge over his rivals. In a desperate ritual, he summoned Pazuzu, offering a human sacrifice, a victim whose life he took to bind the demon's strength to his own. For a time, it worked. Victor's operations flourished amid storms that conveniently disrupted his enemies. But demons don't make deals without a price. Pazuzu turned on him, driving Victor to madness. In 1987, he jumped from the Tampa Bay Bridge. His body, recovered from the waters below, ruled a suicide. The house sat empty for a while before the Ramirez family moved in, unaware of the shadow lingering there. Gina's possession started innocently enough. One afternoon, while cleaning the garage, a dusty space filled with old boxes and forgotten relics, she stumbled upon a small statue carved from stone that felt unnaturally warm. It depicted a grotesque figure, matching descriptions of Pazuzu from ancient texts. Bulging eyes, snarling mouth, wings spread wide. Curiosity got the better of her. She touched it, perhaps even prayed over it mistakenly, thinking it a cultural artifact. That contact opened a door. In the days that followed, strange occurrences plagued the house. Whispers in the wind even when doors were shut, shadows moving in corners where no light cast them, and Gina's behavior, shifting mood swings, nightmares of deserts and plagues, drawings that depicted apocalyptic scenes she claimed came from visions. By the time of the broadcast, the possession was full-blown. Father Lampert, with his calm demeanor, honed from years of facing such evil, pressed on. He commanded Pazuzu to confess its origins. Through Gina's lips, it snarled, "I am Pazuzu, king of the demons of the wind. I brought the Black Death to your lands, carried on gales of poison." It referenced historical plagues like those in ancient Babylon, where it manipulated sorcerers to unleash droughts that starved entire cities. This wasn't random ranting. Historians later verified the details matched obscure records. The studio audience and millions watching at home were gripped by fear. Calls flooded the network. Some dismissed it as a hoax, but others especially in Catholic communities, recognize the signs. Barbara Walters, recovering from the personal attack, probed further. Why this girl? What does she have to do with you? The demon laughed, a sound like thunder cracking dry earth. She is of the bloodline, a descendant of those I cursed long ago. This was the first hint of a deeper connection, a thread tying Gina to ancient victims. But Father Lampert didn't falter. He invoked the name of Christ, splashing more holy water, which caused Gina's skin to blister as if burned. The broadcast ended abruptly as the entity raged, objects in the room rattling across on the wall, twisting, a Bible page tearing itself out. The aftermath was chaos. Newspapers, headlines screamed, demonic possession on live TV, protests from skeptics, prayers from believers. For the Ramirez family, it was just the beginning of a nightmare that would engulf them all. In my role as an exorcist, I've seen how these public exposures can both warn and endanger. They remind us that evil is real, as Scripture teaches in Ephesians 6. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world. But they also invite curiosity, which can open doors we shouldn't touch. As the days after the broadcast unfolded, the disturbances at the Ramirez home intensified, drawing in the whole family and revealing more about Pazuzu's insidious plan. But that's for the next part of the story. For now, remember, faith is our shield, and in the face of such darkness, we must hold fast to the light of Christ. Now, let's pick up where we left off. After that shocking broadcast on 2020, the Ramirez family didn't get a moment's peace. The public was in an uproar. Letters poured into ABC, some calling it a rating stunt, others begging for prayers, but down in Tampa, the real storm was brewing inside that house on Bayshore Boulevard. Gina, still just a kid at 16, started slipping into these deep trances, almost like she was channeling something from another time. Her eyes would glaze over, and she'd speak in that same raspy voice, recounting tales that no history book in her high school library could have taught her. She described how Pazuzu, this ancient demon, had whispered into the ears of Babylonian sorcerers back in the days of Hammurabi's code, convincing them to perform rituals that summoned droughts and famines. I dried the rivers, the voice would howl through her, turn fields to dust, and watch the people beg for mercy. It was as if Gina was a vessel for this entity's memories, revealing bit by bit how it thrived on chaos, manipulating weather to spread starvation and disease across entire civilizations. At first, the family tried to dismiss it as after effects from the exorcism attempt on TV. Maria, Gina's mother, a devoted woman in her 40s who spent her days tending the home and volunteering at the local parish, clung to her faith, praying the rosary nonstop. But the signs escalated quickly, turning their everyday life into a battlefield. Objects began moving on their own, not gently, but with violent force. Doors would slam shut with enough power to crack the frames, even on calm evenings when no breeze stirred the palm trees outside. One night, as Maria was preparing dinner in the kitchen, a heavy cast iron skillet flew across the room, narrowly missing her head and embedding itself in the wall. She crossed herself, whispering, "Jesus, protect us." But the attacks didn't stop there. Windows shattered without warning, sending shards of glass flying like shrapnel from an invisible explosion. Gina's room became the epicenter. Her bed would shake as if an earthquake hit, and mirrors would crack in spiderweb patterns, reflecting distorted faces that weren't hers. That's when Maria got hurt for the first time. She was in the bathroom, brushing her hair in front of the vanity mirror, when it suddenly fractured with a deafening pop. A jagged piece sliced across her hand, deep enough to require 10 stitches at Tampa General Hospital. The doctors there, puzzled by the story, suggested it might be structural stress from the humid Florida air, but Maria knew better. She confided to the nurses, "It's not the house, it's something inside it." Blood dripped onto the tile floor, mixing with what looked like fine sand that had somehow appeared from nowhere. Back home, Juan, Gina's father, a hard-working fisherman in his mid-40s, used to battling Gulf storms, tried to keep things together. He'd come back from long days on the boat, smelling of salt and fish, only to find the family in disarray. Carlos, the 18-year-old brother, who had always been the steady one, playing soccer after school and dreaming of college, started acting out too. He'd mutter under his breath, eyes distant, as if listening to whispers only he could hear. The possessions deepened. Gina's trances turned into full convulsions, her body arching unnaturally, limbs twisting in ways that made the family fear she'd break her own bones. During one episode, witnessed by a visiting neighbor, she levitated not dramatically like in movies, but enough to lift a few inches off the floor, her toes dangling above the carpet while her hair fanned out like caught in a gale. Father Lampert, who had stayed in touch after the broadcast, rushed back from New York upon hearing this. He arrived with his Vatican-approved tools, a blessed crucifix, vials of holy water from Rome, and the ritual Romanum. Testing Gina, he commanded the spirit to manifest. She vomited not bile, but dry, gritty sand, the kind you'd find in the Sahara, piling up on the floor in small dunes that shifted as if blown by an unseen wind. This is no illness, Father Lampert told the family solemnly. This is oppression leading to possession. We must act, but carefully. Maria, desperate for any solution, remembered the strange statue Gina had found in the garage. Thinking it might be the source, she took it outside one evening, doused it in lighter fluid, and set it ablaze in the backyard. Flames licked the stone figure, and for a moment, there was silence. But instead of weakening the entity, it seemed to enrage it. The air grew thick, like a sandstorm rolling in, even though the sky was clear. Gina screamed from inside the house, her voice echoing, "Foolish woman, you feed me with your fear." The statue didn't burn completely. It cracked open, releasing a puff of acrid smoke that smelled of sulfur and decay. From that night on, the manifestations intensified. Pazuzu's voice through Gina grew louder, declaring, "I am the bringer of the deadly storm. I will consume this bloodline." The demon began revealing more of its plan, piecemeal, as if toying with them. In one trance, Gina spoke of how Pazuzu had chosen her not by chance, but because of a distant lineage, a thread back to ancient victims in Mesopotamia, cursed generations ago. "Your ancestors fled my wrath," it mocked, "but I follow the blood." This revelation shook Maria, who traced her family's Hispanic roots, but never imagined such a supernatural tie. Juan, skeptical at first, started believing when the wind started not outside, but indoors. Gusts would whip through rooms, carrying phantom dust that stung the eyes and choked the throat. One such blast knocked over family photos, shattering frames and revealing hidden scratches on the walls that formed archaic symbols, like those from Assyrian tablets. Then came the attack on the family itself. Carlos, who had been resisting, suddenly turned. It was a humid afternoon by the pool. Juan was resting after a fishing trip, dozing in a lounge chair. Carlos approached, his face contorted, eyes glazing over with that same unnatural gleam. Without a word, he shoved his father hard into the water. Juan, caught off guard, flailed as Carlos held him under, bubbles rising in frantic bursts. "Die, as they did in the floods I sent," Carlos growled in a voice not his own. Maria heard the splash and screams, rushing out to pull Carlos away. Juan surfaced, gasping, water streaming from his lungs. He'd nearly drowned in their own backyard pool, just feet from safety. Carlos snapped out of it moments later, horrified, claiming he blacked out and saw visions of raging tempests swallowing villages. Father Lampert, upon examining him, detected infestation, not full possession like Gina's, but influence, as demons often spread to weaken the household. This incident cracked the family's resolve. Juan, coughing up water for days, confided his own doubts. "I faced sharks and hurricanes at sea, but this is evil from hell." They barricaded themselves in prayer, but Pazuzu pressed on, whispering temptations. Through Gina, it detailed more of its history, how it had manipulated Victor Hale, the previous owner, into murdering a business rival by staging a car crash during a conjured storm. I gave him power, the demon boasted, then took his soul when he jumped from that bridge. This tied back to the house's dark past, explaining the lingering malevolence. The garage, where the statue was found, now felt like a portal. Tools would rearrange themselves overnight, forming patterns that resembled demonic seals. As an exorcist myself, I've seen how these entities build their assaults layer by layer, starting with infestation of places, then oppression of people, leading to possession. In Gina's case, it was textbook, but amplified by Pazuzu's affinity for elemental chaos. The Vatican got more involved, sending directives to Father Lampert, urging a full investigation. But before they could mobilize, the violence ramped up further, pulling in outsiders and revealing even darker secrets buried literally in the property. We'll get to that escalation soon. For now, hold on to this. Demons like Pazuzu prey on division, but unity and faith can bind them. As St. Paul reminds us, put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. The Ramirez family's stand was just beginning, and it would test them to their core. Moving deeper into this harrowing account, by mid-1991, the Ramirez home had transformed into something akin to a desert inferno right there in subtropical Florida. The air inside grew heavy and arid, as if the humidity of Tampa Bay had been sucked away, replaced by scorching winds that carried invisible toxins. These weren't natural breezes. They howled through sealed rooms, whipping up clouds of fine dust and sand that materialized from thin air, stinging skin and eyes like needles. One, Gina's father, bore the brunt one sweltering afternoon while trying to repair a window shattered in a previous outburst. As he hammered in a board, a sudden gust blasted his face, embedding gritty particles into his corneas. He dropped to his knees, clutching his eyes, screaming in agony as the abrasion felt like fire. Rushed to the emergency room at Tampa General, doctors diagnosed severe corneal damage, scratches deep enough to blur his vision permanently in one eye, requiring bandages and drops for weeks. It's like someone threw sand in my face, he told Maria through tears, but they both knew it was no accident. This was Pazuzu's signature, the demon of winds, turning the home's atmosphere into a weapon. Carlos, the brother, wasn't spared either. The influence that had gripped him during the pool incident lingered, festering like an infection. Late one night, as the family huddled in the living room reciting prayers, another sand-laced whirlwind erupted around him. His mind clouded with visions of barren wastelands and dying crowds. He grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, drawn to it as if compelled, and slashed at his own wrists. Blood sprayed across the floor, mixing with the swirling dust to form a muddy paste. Maria screamed, tackling him to the ground, while Juan, half-blind, fumbled for a towel to staunch the flow. Carlos lost a dangerous amount of blood before paramedics arrived, sirens wailing down Bayshore Boulevard. At the hospital, he needed transfusions and stitches, hovering near death's door from hypovolemic shock. Waking up, pale and bandaged, he whispered to Father Lampert, who visited bedside, "It made me see my family as enemies." Like I had to end the line. This self-harm wasn't suicidal ideation, it was demonic oppression, pushing him to destroy the very bloodline Pazuzu targeted. Father Lampert, recognizing the urgency, called in reinforcements from the Diocese of St. Petersburg. Enter Father Thomas Riley, a younger priest in his mid-30s, with a background in psychology and a fresh Vatican training in exorcism protocols. Riley arrived at the house looking composed, carrying a briefcase of blessed items, relics from saints, anointing oils, and a detailed logbook for documenting manifestations. Together, they conducted an emergency assessment, interviewing the family under candlelight since the power flickered erratically, bulbs exploding in showers of glass. Gina, restrained on the couch to prevent harm, entered another trance during the session. Her voice boomed. "I am he who rode the winds of the Black Death scattering plague across your Europe in the 14th century. Father Riley, cross-referencing church archives later, confirmed the eerie accuracy Pazuzu-like entities had been blamed in medieval lore for winds carrying the bubonic plague, killing millions from Italy to England. This wasn't fabrication. It matched exorcism records from that era, where demons boasted of historical atrocities to instill despair. The priest declared it a confirmed case of true possession, not just infestation. We've seen oppression, Father Labar explained to the Ramirezes, his voice steady despite the chaos, but this is diabolical obsession at its core. Pazuzu isn't random, it's strategic. They blessed every room, sprinkling holy water that sizzled on contact with certain walls, leaving scorch marks like acid burns. But Pazuzu retaliated viciously. One evening, as Maria stood on the second-floor balcony, overlooking the bay to catch a breath of fresh air amid the stifling indoor storms, an unnatural force shoved her from behind. She tumbled over the railing, plummeting about 10 feet to the concrete patio below. The impact shattered her pelvis in multiple places, causing internal bleeding and excruciating pain that left her immobilized. Juan heard the thud and her cries, rushing out to find her crumpled, blood pooling from a gash on her head. At the hospital, surgeons inserted pins and plates during a grueling operation, warning she'd need months of rehab to walk again. Maria, from her bed, clutched her rosary tighter. It whispered, "Fall in my ear," like a push from hell. This assault marked a turning point, spilling the evil beyond the family. Neighbors started noticing oddities, strange howls echoing at night, lights flickering in the Ramirez windows like Morse code from the underworld. One such neighbor, a man in his 50s we'll call Elias Crow, lived next door. Elias had a checkered past, a local thug with arrests for assault and petty crime, the kind of guy who hung around dive bars and avoided church. Unbeknownst to anyone, Pazuzu had been eyeing him as a pawn. Late one night, Elias burst through the Ramirez front door, wild-eyed and armed with a handgun he'd kept hidden. "The voices told me to end this," he shouted, firing a shot that grazed Father Riley's shoulder as the priest dove for cover. Blood soaked Riley's shirt, the wound deep enough to nick an artery, requiring immediate surgery to clamp it off and prevent fatal blood loss. Chaos ensued. Juan tackled Elias, disarming him amid the struggle, while Carlos called the police. Elias was arrested, babbling about winds, commanding him as they cuffed him. In the interrogation, Elias revealed fragments that pieced together more of the puzzle. He'd been having nightmares of ancient curses, drawn to the Ramirez garage, where he'd once helped Victor Hale, yes, the previous owner with shady dealings back in the 80s. This connection hinted at a web wider than imagined, but the real revelation came during a subsequent session with Gina. Under Father Labar's questioning, Pazuzu gloated through her. "I chose the girl because her veins carry the echo of my ancient foes, descendants of those Mesopotamian priests who bound me once." Experts consulted by the church traced genealogical hints. Maria's family line through Spanish colonial roots, possibly linked to Middle Eastern migrations centuries ago, survivors of plagues Pazuzu claimed credit for. This bloodline curse explained the targeting not random, but vengeful, a demonic grudge spanning millennia. The diocese escalated protocols, petitioning Rome for full exorcism authorization, which arrived swiftly given the publicity. But waiting wasn't an option. The attacks mounted daily furniture, levitating and crashing, walls oozing a foul, sandy slime that burned skin on touch. Father Riley, bandaged but resolute, warned, "This entity feeds on fear. We counter with faith." The family attended Mass when able, drawing strength from the sacraments. But Pazuzu mocked them, causing Gina to desecrate holy items by spitting on crucifixes during fits. As an exorcist reflecting on this, I see how these escalations test the soul's mettle. Proverbs reminds us, "The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe." Yet safety felt distant as the climax approached. With the formal rite set in a secluded spot to contain the fury, blood had been spilled, lives altered, and darker twists loomed secrets buried deep, ready to surface in the battle ahead. Hold firm, the light prevails, but only through unyielding prayer. As we delve into the heart of this spiritual warfare, the formal exorcism rite commenced in July of 1991, not within the cursed confines of the Ramirez home, but at an abandoned monastery on the outskirts of Tampa, a strategic choice to isolate the demonic force and prevent its influence from spilling into the bustling city streets. The old stone walls, once a haven for contemplative monks, now stood as a makeshift fortress against evil, its chapel dimly lit by flickering candles that cast long shadows across crucifixes and statues of saints. Father Lampert, leading the charge with his unwavering resolve, was joined by Father Riley, still nursing his bandaged shoulder from the gunshot, and Dr. Warren Schlanger, a psychiatrist in his mid-50s, with a gentle demeanor, brought in to monitor Gina's physical and mental state amid the ordeal. They used every tool in the church's arsenal: holy water blessed by the Pope, a silver crucifix forged in Rome, passages from Scripture recited in Latin, and relics like a fragment from the true cross to amplify the power of prayer. The sessions began at dawn, when spiritual energies are said to be most vulnerable, with Gina secured to a wooden chair in the center of the chapel, her frail body already marked by bruises from prior convulsions. Carlos, showing signs of lingering infestation, was kept nearby under watch, as was the rest of the family. Maria in a wheelchair due to her shattered pelvis, Juan with his eye patch, all clutching rosaries like lifelines. Father Lampert opened with the Litany of the Saints, invoking heavenly intercession. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle, but Pazuzu wasted no time in countering. Through Gina's contorted mouth, it unleashed a torrent of blasphemies, its voice a whirlwind of rage that rattled the stained glass windows. You mortals dare challenge the King of Winds? I fell from grace in envy of your pitiful lives, cast out for refusing to bow to clay-born weaklings. The demon's revelations poured forth in calculated drips, designed to erode morale. In the first grueling hours, it detailed its fall, once a celestial being, twisted by jealousy of humanity's favored status with God, now seeking to drag souls into the abyss through deception and despair. As Father Lampert pressed with commands, by the power of Christ, confess your sins, Pazuzu summoned a spectral gale within the sealed room. Sand and dust swirled from the stone floor, forming a choking vortex that targeted Father Riley. He gasped, clutching his throat as invisible grains filled his lungs, causing him to collapse in a fit of coughing blood. Despite Dr. Schlanger's frantic CPR and oxygen from a medical kit, Riley's condition deteriorated rapidly. Pneumonia-like inflammation set in, his breaths shallow and labored. He was rushed to a nearby clinic, but passed away hours later from acute respiratory failure. His last words, a whispered prayer, "Lord, have mercy." The loss hit hard. Riley had been the optimistic one, reminding everyone that God wins in the end. Now his absence left a void, amplifying the fear that Pazuzu fed upon. Maria, witnessing this from the sidelines, couldn't stay silent. Wheelchair-bound but fierce in spirit, she wheeled forward, brandishing her crucifix. "Leave my daughter, you beast!" Pazuzu turned its malice on her, using Gina's hands, though bound to lash out with unnatural force. Claws seemed to extend from Gina's nails, raking across Maria's chest through her blouse, leaving deep gashes that tore fabric and flesh. Blood welled up immediately, the wounds festering with an unnatural speed, turning red and swollen as infection set in. Dr. Schlanger applied antiseptics, but Maria spiked a fever that night, delirium setting in as she muttered about winds carrying poison. Antibiotics from the hospital barely pulled her back from the brink, her temperature soaring to 104 degrees Fahrenheit, a brush with septic shock that left her weakened but more determined to fight for her family. The second session brought the first major twist, unraveling like a thread pulled from a dark tapestry. As Father Lampert intensified the prayers, sprinkling holy water that steamed on Gina's skin, Pazuzu shifted tactics, leaping momentarily to Carlos, who had been praying quietly. His eyes rolled back, and through him, the demon sneered. "I've walked this earth longer than your church has stood. I whispered to men like Elias Crow, guiding his hand in the shadows. This name drop sent chills. Elias, the neighbor now in custody for the shooting, wasn't a random intruder. Pazuzu elaborated, its voice dripping with glee. In 1989, I compelled him to take a young woman's life, a girl who strayed too close to my secrets. Buried her under the garage floor where the statue waited. Father Lampert halted the rite momentarily, contacting authorities through a diocesan liaison. Police excavated the Ramirez garage that very week, unearthing skeletal remains wrapped in decayed cloth. Forensics confirming a female victim, strangled and hidden 2 years prior. Elias, questioned again, confessed under duress, claiming the wind made me do it, but evidence tied him directly, his fingerprints on a shovel found nearby. This revelation not only validated the demon's reach, but exposed a human accomplice network, turning the case into a criminal investigation intertwined with the supernatural. Yet the horrors peaked in a blood-soaked climax during the third session. Elias, somehow bailed out by unknown means, perhaps manipulated allies, appeared at the monastery gates, eyes glazed with possession. He forced his way in, wielding a concealed knife, screaming, "The master calls for blood!" Before guards could intervene, he lunged at Father Lampert mid-prayer, plunging the blade into the priest's chest. The wound was catastrophic, piercing a lung, blood frothing from Lampert's mouth as he slumped against the altar. Dr. Schlanger and Juan rushed to apply pressure, but it was too late. Lampert gasped his final breath, eyes fixed on the crucifix. "Into thy hands." His death was a martyrdom, echoing the sacrifices of early church exorcists, but it shattered the team's core. Panic ensued as Pazuzu laughed through Gina. One down, more to fall. In the ensuing chaos, Dr. Schlanger, though not a priest, but a man of quiet faith, stepped up, using his medical expertise to stabilize the scene while auxiliary clergy arrived from St. Petersburg. It was he who uncovered the next twist, observing Juan's subtle symptoms. Unexplained weakness, whispers he dismissed as fatigue from his eye injury. Through careful questioning and a minor rite, they realized Pazuzu had infested Juan from the start, exploiting his role as family head, weakened by prior health issues like high blood pressure from years on the boat. The demon hopped vessels, Schlanger explained, using Juan as a hidden anchor. This necessitated a dual exorcism, binding both Gina and Juan with blessed ropes, extending the rites into exhausting marathons. Over the next 9 sessions, totaling 12 in all, the battle raged with unrelenting intensity. Pazuzu conjured illusions of plagues, making participants see boils on their skin or hear cries of dying ancients. Holy water burned like acid on the possessed, eliciting howls that echoed through the monastery halls. Twists emerged relentlessly. The demon admitted manipulating Victor Hale not just to suicide, but to curse the property as a trap for future inhabitants, and revealed ties to other unsolved crimes in Tampa, like mysterious drownings during unexplained storms. Dr. Schlanger documented it all, his notes later shared with Vatican archives. Finally, after hours of invocation, "I cast you out in the name of Jesus," Pazuzu weakened, its winds dying to whispers. It fled with a final curse, but not without one last strike, en route home after the rite, Carlos's car swerved inexplicably on a dry road, crashing into a guardrail. He survived, but with spinal damage, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down, confined to a wheelchair at 18. In reflecting on this as an exorcist, I've learned that victory over evil often comes at great cost, but it affirms God's sovereignty. As in Revelation, the dragon is cast down, yet the fight demands vigilance. The Ramirez family saga didn't end there. The aftermath brought profound changes, scars that lingered long after the wind stilled. But that's the final chapter in this tale of darkness and redemption. Stay rooted in prayer, for the adversary prowls, but Christ has overcome the world. With the exorcism concluded and Pazuzu banished back to the abyss from whence it came, one might hope for a swift return to normalcy for the Ramirez family, but as I've witnessed in countless cases over my years as an exorcist, The scars of such encounters run deep, etching themselves into the soul and reshaping lives in ways that echo long after the immediate threat has passed. The immediate aftermath was a tapestry of grief and fragmentation woven from the threads of loss and survival. Gina, the young girl at the center of this storm, emerged physically intact but profoundly altered in spirit. At just 16, she carried the weight of memories no child should bear, visions of ancient plagues, the sensation of an alien force puppeteering her body, and the guilt of the violence inflicted through her. Doctors prescribed antipsychotic medications to quiet the lingering echoes in her mind, hallucinations of whispering winds that persisted in quiet moments. By 1993, her family decided a fresh start was essential. They relocated her to California, to a quiet suburb near Los Angeles where the ocean breeze might drown out the desert gales of her nightmares. There, Gina found a path to healing, channeling her ordeal into advocacy. She became a voice for others touched by possession, speaking at church retreats and support groups, sharing her story not for pity, but to affirm that recovery is possible through faith and community. God pulled me from the sand, she'd say, her drawings now depicting scenes of redemption rather than ruin. Maria, Gina's steadfast mother, bore her own burdens with a resilience born of devotion. The physical wounds from her fall and the slashes during the rite healed slowly, leaving her with a limp and chronic pain that flared on stormy days, as if Pazuzu's touch lingered in her bones. But the emotional toll proved heavier. The constant fear, the sight of her children twisted by evil, and the death of brave priests like Labar and Riley strained her marriage beyond repair. In 1992, just a year after the rites, she filed for divorce from Juan, seeking solace in solitude and deeper involvement with the church. She moved to a small apartment in Tampa's historic district, collaborating with diocesan officials to document the case for educational purposes, warning parishioners about the dangers of occult curiosities like that fateful statue. Maria's testimony appeared in confidential church bulletins, emphasizing how everyday objects can become conduits for darkness if mishandled. She found purpose in counseling families facing similar trials, her rosary-worn hands offering comfort. Prayer isn't a shield, it's a sword. Wield it wisely. Juan's fate was perhaps the most tragic, a slow unraveling that mirrored the demon's insidious nature. Already weakened by his corneal burns and the hidden infestation that had sapped his strength during the possession, he struggled to return to the sea. Fishing trips grew shorter, his boat bobbing aimlessly in the bay as fatigue set in earlier each day. By 1995, complications arose, heart strain from the stress, compounded by untreated hypertension that doctors traced back to those terror-filled months. He passed quietly in his sleep, found by Carlos in their old home, a Bible open on his chest to the passage from Job about enduring trials. His death certificate listed natural causes, but those close to the family knew the truth. Pazuzu's curse had claimed another life indirectly, a parting shot from the shadows. The funeral was small, held at the same parish where the family had sought refuge, with Maria attending from afar, their shared grief, a silent bridge over the divide. Elias Crow, the manipulated neighbor whose hands had dealt the fatal blow to Father Labar, faced earthly justice in a courtroom drama that captivated local media. Charged with murder, assault, and the earlier killing unearthed from the garage, that poor girl's remains finally laid to rest with dignity, Elias mounted a defense laced with claims of demonic coercion. "The wind controlled me," he testified, describing visions of swirling sands and commands echoing in his skull. Skeptical jurors dismissed it as delusion, especially after forensic evidence linked him irrefutably to the crimes, including DNA on the buried victim's clothing. Sentenced to life without parole, he rots in a Florida state prison, his cell reportedly plagued by odd drafts that guards attribute to poor ventilation. Whispers among inmates speak of Elias muttering ancient words in his sleep, a reminder that possession's tendrils can linger even behind bars. The house on Bayshore Boulevard stood as a monument to the ordeal, empty and echoing after the family scattered. Boarded up by 1992, It attracted urban explorers and thrill seekers drawn by the TV broadcast notoriety, though most fled after hearing unexplained moans or feeling sudden chills. In 1996, a freak storm, unnaturally fierce for the season, with winds howling like tormented souls, tore through the neighborhood, reducing the structure to rubble. Meteorologists called it a microburst, but locals whispered of vengeance, noting how neighboring homes sustained minimal damage while the Ramirez property was obliterated as if targeted by an invisible force. The lot sold cheaply, redeveloped into condos, but reports of strange occurrences persist, tenants complaining of sandy footprints appearing overnight or dreams of winged horrors. Even decades later, by 2010, anomalies dotted records along Bayshore. Unexplained illnesses mimicking ancient plagues, sudden gusts shattering windows, and sightings of shadowy figures in the fog. Church investigators, including colleagues of mine, documented these as potential residual hauntings, warning that Pazuzu, though expelled, might lurk in wait for a new vessel, perhaps someone dabbling in forbidden lore or inheriting that cursed bloodline unknowingly. These lingering signs underscore a truth I've preached in my ministry. Evil doesn't vanish, it retreats, patient as the desert sand shifting over time. In closing this account, drawn from those church reports and the echoes of that 2020 episode, I urge you to heed the lesson. As an exorcist appointed by the Vatican, I've faced down demons in quiet homes and grand cathedrals, and each time, victory comes not from human strength, but from surrendering to God's grace. Faith triumphs over the fallen ones, as Christ demonstrated in casting out legions. Yet we must guard against curiosity, the statue Gina touched, the rituals Victor invoked. These are doors we open at our peril. Avoid the shadows, cling to the light. As Psalm 91 assures, he will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. May this story strengthen your resolve, reminding us that in the battle between good and evil, the ultimate weapon is unwavering trust in the divine. God bless you, and stay vigilant.